Hey guys, Daniel here, Mr. Cuervo Racing. Today I'm going to show you little details inside the 700 engine and processes I go through when putting the cases together. A couple things to check, a couple things you can or may want to do, and a couple of ideas to think about. So first thing we'll see is on our engines we add a second set of dowels right here. These large dowels, they're the same as the cylinder to case dowels that drop in right here. So you can order an extra set of those dowels to place in this front and rear hole that's already there from the factory, along with the factory dowels. In my opinion, that adds a little bit more rigidity, keeps those case halves together a little bit more true. These factory dowels are really thin, and adding an extra set in there is only a couple bucks, and you just got to drop them in. So real easy to do. But basically, I got the transmission all set in here, ready to go. It's you probably want to check, make sure it spins free. I have this one locked against the shift drum is basically locked in first gear with this reverse latch up. So it's in first gear. Just double checking operation, make sure that everything spins freely. I have it blocked up. I got a bolt holding it up so it doesn't push on the transmission is not hitting the bench there. Kind of hard to see, but either way, it's easy to lean them up like that. You can get a little bit better view of everything. Another thing you'll want to check when putting these together is this reverse shaft has a half moon index in it where it stops it from rotating. So you want to rock it back and forth, make sure that it can't spin any more than it rotates about 1/8 of an inch of turn. But these gears should fit pretty well flush to each other. If this is sticking up, then you might want to address that. Make sure you got your dowel with your O-ring in there and all the surfaces are clean. What I'll normally do is take some starter fluid, spray it on a clean rag, get it just wet enough, and go over, wipe all the surfaces down. So when you do put new Jan Von 4 in there, that it has a nice clean surface to adhere onto. Same with the other side. Just quick wipe down, make sure it's all oil free and dry. Another thing you want to do is get your oil can. And some of these bearings you can lube while it's together, and some you can't. So this one is a blind hole bearing. You want to put a little bit of oil on there, enough to get it wet, not a ton. Because when we put sealant on this other half, when we put this case on it, you don't want any oil draining down this side and getting on that sealant before it has a chance to dry. So this bearing, just a little bit of oil on there, not enough for it to drip off, but that's it. So on this side, how I do them, you can see some oil down there in the bottom, not a big deal. All these gears are all the internal bushings of those gears are all wet with oil. I am going to lube these counterweight bearings. Those are also blind bearings that you can't get to after. And the ones in the bottom of the transmission that the transmission sits in have already been oiled. So basically, from this step, we're going to apply Jan Von 4. A lot of guys use Honda Bond, which does work. Honda Bond is a pain in the ass to to get an engine apart after it's been applied. I really don't like when I get engines like that, so you got to actually use the press tool to get them apart. Yanbon works really well, doesn't have an issue with it leaking or everything. I haven't had to take an engine back apart for leaking. So kind of messy doing this one hand with the camera right now, but we're gonna get some even spread. I'm gonna come back over and spread this out by hand. I only do one side. If any gets smeared over the inside edge, I just wipe that over real quick. So we're gonna go get an even smear of Yanbon here. Same with these internal passages. These do need to be sealed if possible. A little bit more in here. Go back, double check all the areas, make sure you have a nice thin layer across everything. So while you're doing this, just taking a second visual, seeing if you see anything abnormal. Wow, I'm doing an awesome job of making a mess today. So basically, you can check, make sure all your counterweights spin free, and just take a visual. I see on the end of this crank here, it's got a little burr on it where it looks like it hit into something. Sometimes they get damaged during shipping, even though the boxes look okay. I'll have to take a file and dress that edge. Let's see. So I'll do that once it's together. I can tip it up on the other side. But so all this gets smeared in. I'm doing all these videos on one take, so a lot of this not doing any cutting or editing. So bear with me on time frame on some of this stuff. But just need a nice thin patch here. You don't want any to be so as these case halves tighten together, any extra is going to spit out the outside, but whatever you see on the outside is also going to spit out the inside. So you got to remember that. If you're seeing a lot of additional on the outside, that means you have a lot of additional on the inside. So a little goes a long way. So, all right, I'm gonna set this down for a second. See if we can do that. Let's see. So, as that's sitting, let's see. As that's sitting there, you can take your right-hand case, start dropping it down over the transmission. You'll get to this point, you can lift that rod up by hand. And these cases should go together with not much effort. So, as you can see, that seam is butted up nice and tight. If it doesn't do that in the first shot, then there could be a couple different things wrong that you really want to address at that situation. Sometimes when the engine's leaning, that crank is on the table, sometimes that pushes against that bearing and has a little bit of a thrust issue where it's basically holding this right hand side. What you'll do is just lean it up, see if you can press that together by hand. Another common issue, and it is a major issue, if this reverse shaft, like we talked about earlier, if it's not indexed, it'll be pushing up against this case, and I've seen where guys don't have that index and they still torque down the case, there was like an 1/8 inch gap, they're like, oh, I'll just tighten it down. It's fine. But what ends up happening is it breaks this whole housing out of here, distorts the case, and normally ends up, with the additional stress, normally ends up breaking through here. So they do run, like they will go together if you do tighten them down, but normally they end up breaking after. But so nice tight seal there. There is one bolt that goes in here. I always put red Loctite on that. That's the first thing I normally do, is red Loctite that one, do these top 3 bolts, and then I'll roll this engine up on its side. Let's see. Take this stop bolt out of here. Let's show you how I end up doing this without letting that oil get everywhere. So take that back out. So I'll get these top 3. What I'll do is I'll roll it over on its side. So it'll sit there pretty easy. There's a little bit of pressure separating these cases because this transmission is on the ground. But basically I'll come to the edge of the bench and start putting these bolts in. Tighten them all up, rotate it around, and get to the other bolts. This is something else while we're here. Something else you'll want to look at too is serial numbers on the engines. These are actually batch numbers and not serial numbers. Most of the time they match. If a case has a serial number on it, which would be on the top of the engine, on this flat patch here, that means it was in a bike from the factory and it was sold as a running bike. So these cases are brand new. That's why they don't have a serial number on them. And these batch numbers, normally they match. I have taken brand new cases out of the box from Yamaha that were new cases, and they didn't match out of the box. I called them and they said that it was a discrepancy on batch production, that normally they should match, but it's not a requirement. But if it was new from the factory, those should all match. All those these batch numbers should match. If they don't, it means somebody's taken that engine apart and replaced one side or another. So they can run as an unmatched set, but what you would want to look for is this surface area here on the deck. If they're unmatched sets, it's possible that this surface doesn't line up smooth and could have a gap there. So sometimes that works out. I really don't recommend running unmatched cases, because if that surface is not decked together, then you end up with base gasket leaking and possibly other issues. But that's all for today. Sorry about the long video. I'll catch you guys soon. Thanks.